Good evening. It's good to see everybody here tonight. It's been a good day. We've had another shower this afternoon. It's exciting when we see more children coming. I know this morning, I bet I saw about 7 visitor children this morning. We had a lot of visitors that came with young people, and I want to continue to encourage all of you to make sure to be welcoming. Make sure to invite them into class with you and everything else as best you can. It's a blessing to do that. I'm going to share a little bit tonight. I'm going to talk about some culprits, but they're not actually present in the auditorium, so no one in this auditorium that would be related to me is guilty of the offense that we're going to discuss. But as we finished up Exodus chapter 2, Moses, we saw that he thought he was the one to lead them out of Egypt. He comes and he strikes the Egyptian, and he thinks, now the Israelites will know I'm the one that can get them out of here, but instead they pointed him, and we saw as the chapter ended, he has left, and now he is just going to be a shepherd. Shepherds get a lot of attention in Scripture, don't they? Here's Moses, who for 40 years is watching animals. He's a shepherd. David, King David, what was he doing? He was going to be a shepherd as he came to take out Goliath. That was something that he did. Whenever Jesus was born, who did the angels announce the good news to? The shepherds. Therefore, at my house, I've tried to take that up out in the country a little bit. Tried to be a shepherd. This weekend, I've had 4 new babies. Of course, that always happens when it's 20 degrees. That I had a number of goats that have delivered. And Northview called me. I was speaking this summer at Northview about the Good Shepherd. And as I look in the mirror, I don't see him. So I'm trying to improve my rep. If I'm going to go talk about being a good shepherd, I had, one of these babies are born and they're little and they're sitting out there. And of course, my neighbor who thinks that my herd belongs to her calls me yesterday morning. There's a goat that's had babies and there's one that's not getting up, and she's giving me instructions. So I run down there and I see them. They're actually kind of small. And I thought, well, what would a good shepherd do? So last night I had 5 goats in the garage underneath my bedroom. Had them separated, a little fence around one. Another one had a nice little collar that makes it look like she's special, and she has a leash on her. And she's set in there. They're contained, yet all of their mess is not. So that's what's going on in my house if I seem slightly on edge. I'm trying to watch these animals. I come home this afternoon. I went to Webb Williams' mother passed away, went to that funeral in Mount Pleasant. I came home to an empty house, and I was looking out, and I'd open the garage door and let those moms go out, and I was kind of curious as to what my family did with these animals. A lot of the others had run around. We were hoping they were back in the field. I start looking in the field, and I don't see all of them. I see one of the moms, but the ones with twins, I don't see her. So I opened my garage door. Now, I may have had goats in my garage, but they were contained in a specific area. And I guess just the point that I'm making as we start with Moses, it's a lot easier to manage sheep than it is to manage people. Can we go there? People can be a little more frustrating than the animals, because I opened my garage door and there's a goat that is running free rein in my garage. Now, I was joking with a couple this morning about how they attempt to kill themselves. I've had one that actually wrapped a rope around his throat in my barn and almost commit suicide before I stopped him. I was joking about that this morning. That had happened once. My nanny has gone in, got my chargers, got electrical cords wrapped around her throat, and I walk in and she's running around doing what goats do in my garage, loose to the world. What a mess. Now, again, I have to manage people later tonight, but we won't get into that. Moses is here, and he's just been managing these animals. And they're going to do, but they're going to make a mess, but they're predictable. People are not. Moses thinks that's the end of it. This is the end of my story. Look, things happen. You wouldn't imagine what used to happen or where I came from and what happened. But here I am. I'm 80 years old. I'm thinking that this is going to be the end of my existence. I'm just going to keep on following sheep. But God comes and says, no, I've got something else I want you to manage. We've been talking about looking at God's plan in Exodus. And tonight we're going to be in chapters 3 and 4. Have your Bibles open, because we're going to be walking through these passages as we look at it. But as we begin chapter 3, that's where Moses is. 40 years have passed. We saw that there in Acts chapter 3 in our Bible reading. The 40-year-old is now this 80-year-old shepherd, and you have all the different stages of life that he's dealt with. When you start thinking about the plan of God, you have him as the prince of Egypt, and you're going to have him as the shepherd in Midian, and now he's going to become the leader of Israel. And I think one of the things that I want us to consider is wherever we find ourselves, whatever stage of life we're dealing with, we just want to make sure that in this stage, I'm going to walk with God, whatever state we find ourselves in. Verses 1 through 6, Moses is pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Oreb, the mountain of God, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. Moses is going about his normal day, and he's just chasing sheep. He's just chasing the flocks, but then he sees the bush burning. And maybe that could happen occasionally where there'd be a wildfire or something would take place, but he's watching it and nothing is changing with the bush. The fire just continues to burn. Nothing is being consumed. And he says, I'm going to go check it out. And when he does, he says, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. He said, here am I. Then he said, don't come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said also, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. I think it's hard for us to put ourselves in the place of Moses because many of us have heard about God, have believed in God, and have had a place to go to read about, study, and have God explain to us our entire lives. But in Moses' life, he had his mother tell him that there was a God that once picked one of their ancestors and gave him a place, but he doesn't have a place of worship. He doesn't have a real place of reference. He sees this supernatural thing taking place, and then he finds out that this is God speaking to him from the bush. He removes his feet, he falls on his face. And I want you to see something because I want you to think about this as we walk through Exodus. When Moses comes in contact with God, what does he do? He hides his face because he's afraid. Hold on to that because when we get to Exodus chapter 33, you know what Moses is going to get as he walks with God through all these different stages and all these difficulties and all these frustrations of life, all these highs and lows. He's going to say, God, let me see your glory. So I want you to just put that in the back of your mind. What we are reading with God's plan and his purpose and all these things and all the ups and all the downs are going to take a person from where he's just hiding. He is scared and afraid of God. But at the end, what's he going to want? I want to see you. He's even going to ask for more than what God can do for him. But walking faithfully through every stage gets us to that point. What do we see about God's plan as we read here? We see that it's a long time coming. For Moses, it was going to be a long time coming. God makes himself known in various ways. The question is Moses going to be willing to answer the question? Look at what God says in verses 7 through 9. The Lord says, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their suffering. So I've come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them up from a land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Now behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. I don't know how much Moses thought about the Israelites and what they had gone through and the idea of their slavery and what had gone on. Obviously, he was moved early on at 40 years old to say, I want to try to deliver them. But at this point, is that just a distant memory? Is that something that he thought about? But look, that was 4 decades ago, and now I'm simply watching sheep. Those people were in the back of my mind. But here he gets the good news. Did you see everything God said? God says, I know it when my people are hurting. That teaches us something about God, doesn't it? I know when my people are hurting, and he really described it. Look back at it, verse 7. I've seen their affliction. I've given heed to their cry. I see what they're dealing with. I hear their cries. I'm aware of their suffering. Verse 9, I've seen their oppression. Well, when we're looking at God's plan, what do we see about it? God's plan sometimes involves difficulty. If you were to cheat a little bit and move around and you looked over in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 4 through 6, the Hebrew writer is talking to Christians, and he says, look, when it comes to hardships and what you're going to face and what you're going to deal with, it kind of relates to the idea of the post that I shared with you this morning with Josh Jones. What do we do when we're facing hardship in this life? The Hebrew writer says this in verse 4, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin, and you have not forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. The Hebrew writer there is quoting from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12, when he says, those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines. Well, you have the Israelites that are in Egypt. They're being mistreated as slaves. Their taskmasters are doing all these things to them. They're going through difficulty. But one of the things that you'll see the author of Hebrews continues to say in those passages is he says God allows hardships to form us just like any father does his children. Any father sees a child going through a hard time, and what do you want to do? You want to help them every time, but sometimes no, they need to get up. They need to walk on their own. They need to face that challenge. They need to go up and have that conversation for themselves, and you sort of pull back in order to allow them to be tested, to stretch and to grow and to become what they need to be. And sometimes that's going to be the case, that God is going to allow us to be disciplined by difficulty and hardship. Well, how does that relate to the Israelites? How are you going to get 1 million people to say, I'm getting out of this country and following this guy? If they were separated, that was God's plan, and for about 400 years he allowed them to be separated from the Egyptians. He allowed them to be part of a country that was already established that could defend its own borders. They're growing, but they didn't want anything to do with the Israelites, and they've continued to grow. And by God's plan, over 4 centuries, this group of 70 people is going to grow, and we're going to see 600,000 men leaving Egypt, plus all the women and children. This is going to be a massive group of people. They've been protected by God, by Egypt, and this has put this border around them. But how in the world are you going to get them out there? One, to lead them, for Pharaoh to let them go, that's going to be a challenge. The other thing is, how does this guy that's been gone for 40 years show up and are like, well, we're following you? Well, when you're facing hardship and you say, look, we're ready to go. I'll take the risk. I don't care what army's going to be sent. There's something that I want to get to the promised land because I want something better than this place. Well, what about us? See, we want all the suffering and all the difficulties and all the pain to go away, but you know what? Then we might just think this is where we're supposed to stay. God has a promised land for his people. In the midst of the place where they are now, the difficulties they face are going to make it easy to say, okay, let's saddle up, let's gather our things, and let's go. But God says, I've heard them. I see them. I care about them. I'm going to deliver them. But within his plan, there's not going to be a smooth road in a broken world. And God is trying to take them to that place. So God's plan involves difficulty. We see it. It involves hardships, but he knows, he sees, he cares. Ultimately, he's going to bring relief, whether it be in this life or the next. God is going to take care of us as his people. So our options are, we can simply wallow in hardships, see all the difficulty, let it make us pessimistic in life, let it make us negative, or we can say, no, we've got a God. He's got a plan. Sometimes there's difficulties, but I'm remaining faithful in this stage of my life. In this valley of life, I'm going to remain faithful. I believe that he is true. He's going to bring me deliverance in this life or the next. And the one thing I won't do is turn around and turn back on him. So we have to make that choice. Well, Moses sees this, verses 7 through 9, that, hey, I've got a plan, I've heard him, I've seen him, and I'm going to deliver him. And Moses is like, man, that's great, God. You go do that. That'll be great. I mean, you have a bunch of burning bushes show up back in Egypt. They'll listen to you. They'll let them go, and then that'll be, you go get them, God. That's great. Except God then tells him that's not exactly the plan. I've told you what I'm going to do. And then you see Moses' mission show up. Look in verse 10 of chapter 3. Therefore, come now, and I'll send you to Pharaoh. I'm watching sheep. I'll send you to Pharaoh so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. And now all of a sudden God has placed it on him. And we see that God has a plan and he has things he wants to accomplish. But ultimately God's going to look at his people and say, okay, you're the one. You're the one that can talk to her. You know right now what she's dealing with, and you're the one who can talk to her and make a difference. You're the one that sees that person coming in, and you can make them feel welcome, or you can talk to them about the Lord, or maybe somebody in your family. I have placed you in their life to step up and to do what I need you to do for somebody who is you fill in the blank. But God shows up and just directly tells Moses, you have been given a mission. And you can imagine Moses hearing that and say, well, hold up, wait just a second. What are you talking about? God has told Moses, you're going to bring them here. It's a huge job, unbelievable numbers of unanswered questions. What about the political implications of that? What about the different relationships and the people he's going to have to talk to and people he's going to have to change, the logistics of trying to move that many people, all the things that could be running through his mind that are so much more difficult than just watching sheep. But let's look at Moses' two questions here in chapter 3 of his response to God's plan. Moses says to God, verse 11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? He says, who in the world am I to go to Pharaoh and talk to him? Who am I to talk to the Israelites at all? Again, I'm just a shepherd. But here we see the difference in the Moses of 40 years ago and the Moses today. 40 years ago, mighty in power and words. I'm the one, everybody, they're going to pay attention. They're going to know I can get them out of here. And God says, I'm not interested in that person leading my people. 40 years later, God comes and says, I've got a plan and I'm ready to do this. And you see a meek person. Arrogance is gone. God is calling him to a job that is bigger than he is. And he says, I don't measure up. And I think that's something very interesting that we learn about God here. God is calling him to a job that is bigger than what Moses can handle. I hope that we still believe that we serve a God of big plans, where only he can accomplish what needs to take place. We had a really neat experience Wednesday night in our men's class. Jerry Wilson came and talked to us about different things of preparing to be an elder. And he talked about some of those meetings that were taking place at the old building. Whenever people said, well, can we move? There's not enough money. Can we do this? I don't know how this would happen. And at some point, you just step out on faith and say, what would take place? And then what happens when you step out on faith and do something more than you've ever done? All of a sudden, you have an opportunity to see all the blanks that you can't fill in get filled in by our God. And I think so many times in our life, what we do is we don't want a God that says, look, figure out how much you can handle and then only do that. Because then basically we don't need God. Moses, you're right. You're not big enough for the job. Who are you to do this? You can't get it all accomplished. But we serve a God who wants big plans, where only we, with his help, can fulfill them. And I would say in your life, if you're only doing what you can do and there's no expectation for God to show up, then you're thinking too small. I hope as a congregation, we don't sit here and think, well, what can we do? It's not about what we can do. It's about what God can do and how we can submit to him to see great things happen. Well, God answers him in verse 12. He says, I'm going to be with you. Certainly I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship at this mountain. He says, look, I'm going to be here, and just to show that this is going to be the case, one of these days you're going to come right back here to where you've been guiding sheep, and you're going to have a whole flock of people that you are leading. I'm going to bring you back here. Moses knows that God is great, but that doesn't mean he understands how that is exactly supposed to work. And I'm sure he spent a long time trying to figure out exactly what God's will is. But he asked him another question in verse 13. Look at what he says. Moses said to God, behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what's his name? What shall I say to him? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. We probably don't reflect a whole lot on how little Moses knows about God and how little the Israelites in Egypt know about God. There is no sacred scriptures. There is no place of worship. They don't have a tabernacle. They don't have a temple. They don't have any priesthood. They don't have any people that are going to talk to them about God. They don't have anything except what's going to be probably the oral stories that would have been passed down from generation to generation about a God. But they don't have what we have. Moses was not going to show up and go, okay, guys, here's all the things that you've seen, and this is how this gets fulfilled. He's showing up and saying, look, I saw the burning bush, and the God of our fathers, our ancestors, has come, and he is ready to deliver you. But for them, you know, all his message is, God has called you out. And he says, well, what's even your name anyways? And he says, I am. That answered it. The word Yahweh, which really we don't even know how it's pronounced, but that's what comes in, and we see that he is going to be the Lord. He says, I am that I am, the God who was and who is to come. His word, there's not a phrase, a term, a name that can encapsulate who I am. I have always been, I am in every way in the present, and I am forever throughout eternity. I am the one who is sending you to them. Verses 15 through 22, you see that God is going to spell out the plan in detail. Now, when we talk about the plan of God, and we're sort of stepping back saying, well, how can I figure out God's plan for my life? This is not what you're going to get. This is one of the rare times where God says, okay, Moses, I know you don't know a lot. I know that you're going to be working with people that don't have all of the background and all of these other things, but here is basically what is going to take place. And in summary of what you look at, you see in verse 16, you're going to go there to the elders, gather all the elders together of the Israelites, and you tell them the things that I'm telling you. Then what's going to take place is I'm going to take you to Canaan. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. Very interesting. I remember when we went to Israel back when we were in school, we got there and we were looking at Israel, and the tour guide sort of joked, it just looks like God was giving the angels different jobs. And he said, okay, you go deliver rocks. And he hit Israel and just tripped, and just they're everywhere. And you're like, a land flowing with milk, and this doesn't look like great land to me. It does not look like the rolling hills of Tennessee. Let's just put it that way. And one of the person asked the guide, well, what's with this? He said, well, no, what did he say? Milk and honey. Well, you just need a hole in the ground for a beehive. Sorry, Jody. You may have some hives or buyer there. And then you need some animals, some place where people could, feed their flocks. You know what you really see in Israel if you look at the history of time? We're not going to run down a history rabbit hole too far. It's the intersection of the worlds. Everything that's happening with Persia, Assyria, Iran, Iraq, everything coming into the Mediterranean, getting down into Egypt and into Africa, and what's right there in the middle of all of it? The Promised Land. Why? Because throughout the centuries of time, man has traveled through that area. And you know what that area is going to do? It's going to bring right in that crossroads of all the worlds, God is going to send His Son. And those roads that have carried everything else are going to carry Jesus to the world. This point, they're nowhere close to that plan, are they? They have no idea, except, hey, we're going to this place, and these other people live there. But God says, I'm going to take you there. I'm going to give you this beautiful place. Verse 18, he says, they're going to pay heed to you, Moses. The elders are going to listen, and you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you'll say, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now, please, let's go 3 days' journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord. But actually, Moses, what I know is Pharaoh isn't going to let you do that. I know Pharaoh, he's not going to be interested. And because of that, I'm going to show with this mighty and powerful hand, I'm going to show Pharaoh who is boss. I'm going to show the Israelites that the God that they have heard about is a God of great power. And I'm going to tell a story that throughout the history of time, people are going to know about what took place as you come out of Egypt. I was at CA one time as one of our former graduates had come back, and he had gone to China and worked as a missionary, and he'd actually married a girl that was over there. And she came in, and I was out in front of the foyer talking to her. And she said she was about 20, 23, maybe years old before she had ever seen the Bible. And she sat down and read the New Testament in a week, having never been exposed to anything. Here's just a story. And two things hit me from that conversation I still remember this day. One, she said, I didn't know anything. I'd heard of Moses, but I didn't know anything about God at all. In China, have no exposure, hadn't seen the Bible. Moses, I know that guy. You mean that shepherd that was chasing sheep? God does something in this story that reverberates across this globe. The second thing she said was this. I said, so how did it hit you? We've always known the story. What was your response to just reading the story of Jesus? She said, I couldn't believe He let Him die. She's reading the story. It's God's son. He's on the cross. These people are abusing him. Well, here it comes. Here it comes. And he gave up a yell and he breathed his last and gave up the ghost. Anyways, we serve a great God, and that was what happened with her. But the idea is what Moses is about to do. Here's the plan. It's spelled out in every way. And I just wanted you to think about this as you think about the plan and how much detail he was given. He comes in and he says, I'm going to strike Egypt with miracles, verse 20. Not only that, verses 21 and 22, he says, actually, you're going to not just get them out of Egypt, you're going to plunder Egypt, because your people are going to go and ask their neighbors, hey, can I borrow that? Could I have this? Can I have that? And I'm going to give you favor in their sight. And all the Egyptians are going to be like, sure, here's all of my stuff. Here's the fine china. Here's the this. Here's the different things you could have of value. And then they're going to leave with all their stuff. And those people are just going to be like, hey, see you later. Unbelievable. What are you even talking about? But you see the details of the plan. He spells it out in detail, but rarely do we see this kind of detail given by God about what is going to take place. But he gives it to Moses. What do you see about God here? He knows the Jews. He knows the Egyptians. He knows Pharaoh's heart. He knows what people are going to say when you say, well, could I borrow that or could I have this? He knows the end result of everything that's going to happen. God knows every detail of the plan, but rarely does he ever show up to us and be like, well, actually, this is what's going to take place. We don't always see that. By the way, God's detail in every way going all the way to the promised land is spelled out in detail. God's plan is, and it's doubted the entire way. Moses is going to wonder, is this really going to happen? The Israelites are going to wonder, is this going to happen? Pharaoh is going to flip-flop every which direction and then try to still turn back on it all. God has his plan. He has it in detail, but it's always going to be doubted. Chapter 4. Okay, I'm going to speed up. Y'all hold on. Moses responds, what if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to what I say? For they might say, the Lord has not appeared to you. This is a real concern. Okay, so I'm about to show up and be like, God sent me. Okay, how do I know that God sent you? Well, a bush was burning and it didn't burn up and I heard a voice. Okay, so do I follow you or get you admitted? What exactly am I supposed to do? What if these people don't believe me? Because that's going to be a real concern as he goes to try to explain it to it. They may say, you didn't see God. Am I just seeing things? Is that what's going on? He may be wondering in his own mind what exactly would take place. But in verses 2 through 9, you see his answer. God is going to say, what do you have in your hand? And he says, a staff. And man, that's a whole nother lesson. This thing has been chasing sheep and directing them now. What can you do with it? And he's going to say, okay, well, whatever you have in your hand, let's start there. Throw it down. It turns into a snake. I'm sorry, I always think of David Thomas right here because Moses pulls up his clothes and takes off running. Okay, some people, when they see a snake, are going to get you just better not be around them whenever they see that snake. Moses throws it down, turns into a snake, and feet don't fail me now. And he's out of there. God says, come back, grab that thing by the tail. He does it, turns back to a staff. There's your sign. Put your hand in your jacket. Pull it out. It's covered in leprosy. Okay, well, you're about to die. This is a bad sign. Put it back in. He puts it in, comes back healed again. How powerful. And he says, and they don't believe that, then you go and take some water out of the Nile that they think is so important, pour it on the ground, it'll turn to blood right there in front of them. What if they don't believe me? I'm going to give you some signs that will enable them to see that, because this is just going to be the beginning. But the Israelites are going to see you and they're going to believe. The Egyptians are going to be able to see these signs as well. And he puts all of those things together. Moses has now heard the detailed plan of God. He's now seen the miracles and the signs that God has given him. And look at his response in verse 10 of chapter 4. Moses said to the Lord, please, Lord, I've never been eloquent recently, nor in times past, nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech. I'm slow of tongue. I can't do this, is what he's saying, isn't it? It's another excuse. I'm not the one to do this. The Lord said to him, who's made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and even I, will be with your mouth and teach you what you're to say. But he said, please, Lord, now send the message by whomever you will. The enormity of this job, I think, is starting to sink in. It's one thing to see a burning bush. It's another thing to start hearing like, oh, well, God hears and he cares. It's a whole other thing to say, now, you're the one that's going to do it. But now, as he's hearing this conversation, he's hearing all this, he's thinking, hold up. This is for real. These things are in motion. God has this plan. These things are going to take place, and I'm the one that's supposed to do it. And now he is trying to back out. He is having second thoughts about following through with everything that's happening. Why? God's plan is clear. He's given signs that make it clear. He's given me things I can do that will prove it to everybody else. How about I just stay here and watch sheep instead? And I would say this when it comes to our response to God's plan. We think, man, I just wish God would show me everything. Really? You want to know every part of God's plan for your life? I don't. What do I want to do? I want to walk through every stage of God's plan being faithful. God has done things in all of the faces that I see in people's lives that have brought you to a place you never thought you would be, brought you through difficulties you never thought or would choose to face. You've seen unbelievable joys because of things where opportunities have come up. You've seen God show up because you are taking small steps, but you serve a big God. There's things that we have seen and that we get to experience in walking with God that you would have never laid those things in front of your life, but here you are. And you didn't know what it was going to be. And frankly, for some of us, we would have said, well, it's too good to be true, or I couldn't imagine that would take place. But here, Moses has it all in detail, and he's like, that seems like a lot to me. If it's a hard plan, you know what we don't want to do? We don't want to see it all today. We don't want to see the next 40 years. Just give me tomorrow. And I think that's a thing that we learn about the plan of God is let's just be faithful today, knowing that God is faithful. He's got a plan. It will be revealed as I need it to be revealed. But ultimately, I trust him to deliver me in this life or the next. Moses tries to back out. Please send someone else. He's trying to take a hard pass on the plan of God. And ultimately, you see God's anger, verse 14. The anger of the Lord burns against Moses. I've given you everything. I've shown you everything. You've got the signs. Moses, I'm tired of playing with you. No more excuses. No more trying to back out. You are going to go. I'll send your older brother. Aaron is about 3 years older than Moses. It's interesting as you look back to the babies and the male children, and obviously as they were throwing their children in the mile, it looks like there's probably different times of when different things would have happened during Moses' birth. That was where, that needed to happen. But his brother is there. God says, I'm going to send him to you. You're going to speak to him, and you're going to let him do the talking. Verse 17, he says, you take in your hand this staff with which you're going to perform those signs. And finally, Moses leaves. Moses takes off with his wife and his 2 sons on his donkey, not quite this conquering leader to show up and go, guys, follow me. He's coming in on a donkey to convince the most powerful king in the world in many ways to let his free workforce leave his country while convincing these people that he hadn't been around for 4 decades to come and say, oh, well, just follow me and just do what I'm telling you. Verse 20, I think, is a pretty neat way to understand why this was going to work. Did you see what happened to the staff? Moses took his wife and his sons and mounted them on a donkey and returned to the land of Egypt. Moses also took the staff of God in his hand. Once I'm going to walk with God, it's not my walk anymore, is it? Once I use what's in my hand, be it a talent, be it a resource, be it whatever it is, it's no longer my talent, it's no longer my ability. This is a way that God is going to work on this earth and make a difference. And we're going to get to see the story of what he does with the staff of God, because even though we don't think we're worthy, even though we don't think we're important enough, powerful enough, accomplished enough, just go with God. And now all of a sudden, whatever you have, you can fill in the blank on what you would have, but this is now God's. And that's how we walk in a faithful way with him. Well, he meets up with Moses and Aaron. They meet the elders. They show signs. They end up believing them. You see that, and you get down to the end of the chapter. Verse 30 said, so the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord was, they believed, and when they heard that the Lord was concerned about the sons of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed down low and worshiped. The people were so thankful that God was watching. A lot of people wonder. I can only imagine being in their place, facing their suffering, their affliction, their oppression, and all of a sudden somebody comes in with good news. And what's the good news? God's watching. He sees. He cares. He's listening. That's the good news. That's the gospel that he has for them. And these people are so thankful to understand that all the things I don't understand, there's somebody who will tell me that God's watching and he has got a plan for what's going on. As we go out into this week, let's be the people that have a good news. God's watching. God cares. God's listening. God's got a plan. Be faithful today. What lessons can we learn very quickly as we close? When we look at the way God's plan comes about from the story, that's one of our objectives. In this story, it's just direct revelation, like God just comes and tells him directly what's going to take place. We don't have that. We don't have it where God's going to come and spell it all out like he spelled it out to Moses. But Moses also didn't have God's word. He didn't have his instructions. He didn't have all of this guidance. That we have all things that pertain to life and godliness. Everything is inspired and we are fully equipped for every good work. And whatever we do, God has spoken to us in a way that Moses would have loved to have been able to hand out to everybody. So while he gets this direct revelation from God, we have been given great guidance as well, and we should never forget that. When we look at the way God prepares people within and for his plan, God prepared Moses here with a lot of time alone, in isolation, gives him a lot of time. I believe as we see him coming to Moses, he makes his will known to him. They see these miraculous signs, and that's not how he's going to come and appear to us today, but I would say that as God comes, when we live, we realize that in him we live and we move and we have our very being, and that he has a plan. He makes many things obvious to us when we read his word, when we seek his path, when we remain faithful. And so many times it's on the back end of that, like, oh, that's why that happened. I thought I was supposed to go here. Obviously I didn't, because I see that God brought me to something better. God allowed me. I wanted this, but God didn't answer it the way I wanted, and thank goodness his plan was better than mine. And we see all those different things that God has seen around us, draw near to him in our daily walks, and what happens ultimately, he will make things clear to us as well. When we look at how different people respond to God as they experience life, we see Moses had questions. Moses wonders about how other people are going to respond if I come and do exactly what God has told me to do. Moses doubts himself. Can you relate? We do that in our lives. We see Moses doing this. Ultimately, was he say, God just pick somebody else. But as we face these impulses, we have to fight them. It's not about you. It's not about your ability. Don't worry about what everybody else is going to think. Don't let the devil put doubts in your mind. Stay faithful every stage of life. Thought it was interesting that Aaron comes in and you have this whole back and forth with Moses. And it's like, oh, your brother Aaron's coming and he's just going to do it. And you don't even have Aaron discussed at all. He's 3 years older. He comes in. Aaron's going to go. He'll be your spokesman, go on to Pharaoh. And we don't get any discussion with Aaron. I just kind of wonder why not. Why didn't Aaron go, hold up, God, this seems like a lot of trouble? Where's Aaron been? He's been in Egypt. He's been a slave. He's watched suffering, hardships, and difficulty. And when he sees this plan, I don't think there's anything to discuss about whether or not he wants it to happen or not. Many times the difficulty and suffering we go through is what causes us to say, I'm on, I'm in. And he's going to answer. Moses has been separated. And I think we need to remember that as well as we go and try to reach other people. If we stay separated from other people's problems, other people's hardships, other people's difficulties, we're never going to be able to connect with them in the way that they need. You know, it's going to make it hard for us to engage and help them get where they need to be. So we can't separate ourselves from the experience of others. As they face difficulty, we need to be there with them. Final lesson, how can we be prepared for whatever comes our way because of the things we see within this book of Exodus? I would say once again, let each stage of life, whichever one you're in, develop you into being more of what God wants you to be. You're a teenager, you got all kinds of challenges and different things, but you've got great opportunity to plug in with God, and he's going to develop you into being something great. When you have young children, what's happening? You've got all this busyness and all these crazy things happening. What do? You struggle to remain faithful in the midst of the blur and the busyness. Middle age, and as we get older, what do? Whatever we face, what we do is different. What we can do is different, but what we can all do is remain faithful, be exactly what God wants us to be. Constantly focus on his plan for our lives, for the church, for our family is spelled out in His Word, and ultimately look at whatever He's placed within our hand and use it for His glory. Well, I hope that Exodus 3 and 4 can inspire you and help each one of us. Appreciate your great attention tonight. As we close, we always want to offer the Lord's invitation to you tonight, and if we can help you, become a Christian. If we can help you follow Him in a better way, we invite you to come as we stand, as we sing.